Morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are around the world. Thank you for zooming in. This is an unprecedented time in human history, and we're together, and we're experiencing it virtually. And so today we pulled together three extraordinary experts that I think are going to really come together in a wonderful way. Normally, Meredith, our first speaker, is involved with risk and advising companies and organizations how to manage it and to mitigate it and to understand it. And so that's a key part of what we're all going through right now, right? And then our next couple speakers, Barry and Kendall, are both leadership experts. They both work with organizations on leadership, on the emotional elements of that, and also the capacity, the organizational capacity elements of that. And so I think the combination of these three great leaders will give you some things to think about today for yourself, for your business, both at work and of course at home. So our first speaker is Meredith Wilson. She's the founder and CEO of Emergent Risk International. She's been a speaker with us before. We love her expertise. She is pretty much our go-to expert around risk around the world. And good Lord, there's sorts of things going on right now that we need to worry about, whether it's on the business side or just walking down the street. And so Meredith, really appreciates you taking the time today and sharing more about some things we should be thinking about.
Awesome. Thank you, Doug. Sorry, I am trying to find my cursor here and having all kinds of technology fails today. I'm going to just share my screen with you, and I'm going to talk through a little bit on the data side of things, and then I'm going to talk just a very quick kind of snapshot around the world, and then we'll go to Barry. So just give me 1 second here, and there we go. Okay, so I am. Hopefully, you are looking at the same thing that I am here. Oh wait, not yet. There we go. Okay, so. What you're looking at right now is our situation room, which is our sort of data and content portal. The reason I wanted to pull this up is I wanted to just kind of have a, kind of a quick look through some of the really really amazing changes in the numbers over the last couple of months that we've seen. So looking at some key stock prices, for example, we've seen Apple go from a high all the way down here, lost about a third of its value. And now it's starting to track back up with the rest of these stocks. Exxon, I'm actually surprised that one's ticking up, but it is a little bit. And of course, Amazon, which is one of the big winners out of this whole thing, if there is such a thing. But the just the sheer volume of shifts in in just kind of week to week, day to day data. These are our cases right here. We're looking at the change right now in the Dow, which is up quite a bit from where it was a week ago. And of course, this rather shocking looking slide here on unemployment claims, which is something that we have not seen in most of our lifetimes. So that's just a kind of a quick look. And then I'm going to take you over to our slide deck here, and we'll kind of dig into some of these numbers and some of these thoughts a little bit. There and there. Okay, so I was finishing this up so quickly that I ended up not even getting our logo on here. But so as we're thinking about this data and we're thinking about what it really means, on a personal level, even the number of people that lost their jobs last week, I'm sure probably every person on the call knows somebody that lost their jobs last week. That's going to continue to happen for the next 3 or 4 weeks, at least, probably longer. Hopefully the stimulus package will alleviate some of that, but where we've seen a lot of those job losses have been in the airline industry, the cruise industry, hotels, restaurants, smaller sort of retail outfits that just cannot hold on to people when there's no demand, businesses that have literally just had to wholesale shut down. Truly unprecedented in our lifetime. So as we're thinking about that, and looking at where these things are really happening. These are some of the hot spots. Now, some of this has shifted a little bit too, but what I wanted to, to show you here is looking at what these curves look like. If we look up here in the corner at South Korea, what we're looking at is a recovery curve where we're starting to see that confirmed cases number flatten out. In places like Iran, I put big cautionary notes on Iran because there's a lot of evidence to suggest that we're not seeing the true numbers there. They are more transparent than they were even a few weeks ago, but there have been a lot of reports of unreported numbers and deaths and that kind of thing. And then we have the US, where we have literally the sharpest curve of any country right now in terms of the climb in cases. And though we've seen a lot of comparisons with Italy and places like that, the one thing I want to point out that's different between the US and Italy is this number down here, which is the fatality rate, is significantly lower in the US, and hopefully it will stay that way. There are a lot of other differences too, comparing the size of the country, comparing the just the closeness of people in Italy, where you have a lot more people in more confined areas, but that doesn't necessarily make this curve any less worrying in terms of where we're going for the next month. Now, that said, we have some nicer news, assuming that I can get my keyboard to, there we go. We have some better news coming out of Asia Pacific right now. Now we're going too far. Hang on, we're out of control. Back, there we go. Some better news coming out of Asia right now, parts of Asia. China, we're starting to see signs of recovery. There is a cautionary note there. I was just talking with a client this morning, and they were saying that there have been reports of reinfection in some people who have previously had the virus. They don't know what that means yet. We just don't know enough about this yet to understand whether it's going dormant and then reappearing, or whether it is whether there is any kind of statistical probability of recurrence. But what that may mean is that some of these factories that are reopening may have to close again. Obviously, China's going to do whatever they can to avoid that, but it is something to be aware of. The other thing is that they are putting more barriers to entry to China now, because they want to avoid the reinfection from people coming back into China. So that is another potential hurdle to really getting things restarted, if there is still a limit to who can come in and out. Now, that said, nobody's traveling anywhere right now, so it's going to work the way it's going to work. The other small area of concern, well, I shouldn't say small area of concern, it's a pretty big area of concern, is South and Southeast Asia are really just starting. India, for example, they've gone to this 21-day lockdown. That's created its own set of problems, but they've closed down most businesses. And that means if you're a company that, say, has, that's doing all of your accounting in India, or has, a large part of your tech supply chain there, or if you have call centers there, most of those are being shut down if they can't create a work from home situation. So there are some really big problem areas there in terms of getting the global economy restarted. And we don't really know what India is going to look like yet. There's a lot of concern that between the shortage, they have a major shortage of doctors and nurses already, and the shortage of healthcare facilities that are equipped to manage something like this, that, that this could be significant in India, but we're still kind of waiting to see what happens there. And technology fail again. And there we go again. Sorry, guys, getting lots of previews here. So in Europe, one of the things about Europe, and this is Europe and the US that we have to be aware of, is that the infection and recovery period here is going to be longer than what we saw in China. That is for a lot of reasons, but the biggest reason is that instead of looking at it as one whole, everybody will do what they're told in China, and we're all going to handle this in a in a uniform manner. You have, both in Europe and the US, a patchwork of municipal, state level, country level, and then in the EU bloc level actions that are being taken, and the result is going to be an uneven recovery, uneven result in different countries. So if you look at Italy versus Germany, for example, the infection rate in Germany is about half of what it is in Italy, but the death rate is like 600 versus almost 12,000 in Italy. So you have two very different healthcare systems, you have two very different approaches, and you have two different problem sets there, meaning Germany is likely to recover quicker. But whatever happens in Italy is still going to affect what's going on in Germany. So you have a much more complicated system that has to recover from this. Similarly, in the U.S., and in the U.S., in some ways, we have it a little bit better because we are not getting hit in multiple major centers. We're not getting a New York in every major city in the country. However, it is going to be very kind of patchwork, and probably all the way through the summer, where you start to see spikes in one place, you start to see it go down somewhere else. And all of that is going to affect the ability of commerce and business to run in a normal manner. So we probably will see these types of stay-at-home orders. I would suggest probably through July anyway. Even Virginia and Maryland yesterday just decided they were going to do a stay-at-home order all the way through June. So you're looking at right now, June 10th and June 12th, I think. That's a ways out. That's almost 2.5 months. So they're looking at it, kind of from the long haul. Now, the president saying 30 days, I still think that's optimistic, but it's definitely more realistic than Easter. So, we're at least kind of moving towards some sort of understanding of we have to keep this in place until we can get over this hump. So I kind of already talked about the U.S. too. So I think the big thing in terms of economic damage, where we're really, really going to see those impacts, are obviously the airlines, the hotels, storefront retail, small business, and the big companies will come back from this. The big companies are not my major concern. The airlines will come back from it because we have to have airlines. If we're going to go anywhere, we need to have airlines. The hotels, the big hotels, will survive. Those chains, a lot of those are franchises, however, so you will see probably a portion of the hotel chains not reopen, where you had smaller business owners that had franchised those out. Storefront only retail. So while the Amazons of the world are going to do just fine, those smaller businesses that were just your kind of main street storefront retail, if they have not been able to adapt, and a lot of them will not be able to adapt that quickly, they will see you'll see a number of those go out of business and probably not come back. There are some economic upsides too, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So not to depress everybody, there are some other things as well. So some of the emerging concerns, and I think one of the most interesting, just from a purely sort of academic perspective, not getting into the personal concerns, but one of the more interesting things about watching this happen is sort of the waves of impacts. You have, we've been watching this since January, and so I'm very tired because it's been ongoing nonstop. We have a lot of technology clients and things like that, so I'm getting very tired. But the waves of impacts have been very interesting. So as we're watching China start to recover, the rest of the world is right in the thick of it. Does it now go to down to Africa and Latin America? Because it's certainly happening down in those places, but we're not hearing as much about it yet. The impact on emerging markets is something that is really, people are just starting to think about. Some of the things that we're watching more closely right now, the impact of the virus on political and business leadership. Again, when we talk about unprecedented, I cannot remember a time in my life where something like this has affected so many high-level politicians, famous people, business leadership. There was a chief financial officer on Wall Street that died 2 days ago. So we're starting to see very tangible impacts to business leadership structures and political structures. How bad that will get, it is hard to say. But They could be just enough to change the political balance in some countries where you have a very, very close, like we have the House and the Senate. We have a just 2 or 3 seats difference, and you can see a complete change in the balance of power in some countries. In businesses that have not properly planned for leadership succession, you could see some very serious impacts. So that's one that we're watching real closely. Food security is another one that's starting to pop up, and this is not the panic buying side of things. This is the countries that are stopping exports of different food products. So India has talked about not exporting produce and certain food products that they generally export. In Asia, they are stopping exports of rice. So these types of things are more likely to have a strong impact in emerging markets and those food-dependent economies. North Africa, for example, other different parts of Africa where they're dependent on wheat imports and things like that. That can drive unrest. That can drive all kinds of other sort of emerging market problems when you run into additional food security issues. So that's one we're watching real closely. Social disorder. So this is kind of the apocalypse now, sort of framework where, people start to think about, oh my gosh, do you have a complete and total breakdown in society? That is not something that we see happening across the board, but it is something that we're watching on a country by country level. And while people are in these lockdown scenarios, what we're actually seeing is crime rates going down. Right, 50, 70% crime rate reductions because everybody's inside and they can't, they really can't come out and commit crimes. However, in these countries, India is a good example where they decided to implement a lockdown with 4 hours notice. And you have all these migrant workers that have come from other parts of the country or other parts of the world that have nowhere to go. Their work sites have shut down, and generally they get paid, and they get their food and lodging on their work sites, and they've shut them down. These people have nowhere to go. So in places like that, where countries do not have the either the planning in place or the resources to deal with the lack of access to food, all of those types of things, we may start to see some social disorder in those places. There have been several instances in Italy now of like looting in grocery stores and things like that. So you're starting to see armed guards outside of grocery stores. I don't expect that to be widespread across Europe, but there are places where we could see that. And finally, and I think this is a good segue into what Kendall's going to talk about later, is mental health concerns. And in particular, the nexus for us as a business risk consultancy is looking at how is this impacting workforces from a security perspective. Does this lead to greater incidents of workplace violence? We are already seeing an increase in domestic violence and violence against children. Does that eventually translate into a workplace violence type scenario as well? So those are some of the emerging concerns that we have. Finally, just a little piece of this is looking at the average traffic in airports this year. So the red bars are your 2020 numbers, and so we're looking at traffic being down in Hong Kong by almost 30%. Those numbers actually, I feel like, should be higher, because when I went through the airport in Dallas the other day, it was 7 o'clock in the evening, and normally it would have been completely full. There was nobody. I mean, nobody. There were 8 people on my flight. So I think the numbers for February and March are going to be significantly different. This is January, February. And so pretty serious changes. The upside, to finish up, these are some of the businesses that are seeing significant growth and significant upticks in business. So the ones you would expect: Costco, the grocery delivery apps, Target. So some of the bigger companies are also seeing a huge increase in the use of things like Zoom. So on the tech side, you're seeing a big increase. So it's a very uneven, this is going to be probably the most uneven recession we've ever seen. Because on the one side, you have this complete shift in demand, and on the other side, you have the exact opposite. So all of that is to say that the future is kind of wide open here in terms of what happens next with the economy and with our business. And that's my last slide. So I'm going to hand it back over to you, Doug, to introduce Barry.
Really appreciate that, Meredith. Thank you very much. Barry is the CEO of Integris Consulting Group, Inc. And Barry is going to be talking today about how you should be managing the data that's coming in, what's real, what's not, and how best to proceed. Normally, Barry is just a fascinating and powerful presenter and educator on leadership. And so, Barry, thanks for taking the time today, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts.
You are very welcome. I'll jump right in. So, no question, as Meredith was talking about, we're dealing with some really challenging times, probably the most challenging since World War II. And here's the thing is, as human beings, we're swimming in a sea of opinions, points of view, dialogues, many different things people are saying. It's like an ocean of culture and an undertow of different paradigms exercising power over us, particularly the media, as you and I know, is known for sensationalism. So you watch, compete with the other stations. So you watch and you can buy from their sponsors. So we can't impact that. I can't talk about that. But where can we make a difference is in your own personal situation that you're dealing with. Some of you might be out of work. Some of you, obviously, your business is not doing as well as it was before, or maybe some of you are profiting. So here's what I like to do. I'd like everyone to take out a sheet of paper, just one sheet. And on it, let's see if I can do this. On one side, you write the facts, and on the other side, interpretations. And we'll get to what we're going to do with this shortly. On the left side, facts, or what happened. On the right side, interpretations. Now, here's the thing. The rules for operating successfully with facts and with interpretations are radically different. So what is a fact? Well, facts are real occurrences, events, something that actually happens. It's real, it's demonstrable, it has existence. It's the quality of being real or actual, something that has been done. Facts are not dependent on anything else for its existence. Facts have dimensions in time and space. They're physical, measurable, demonstrable, like that. A rock is a rock. You can't question what that's about, right? The test for a fact is it's either true or false. Is it true or false? It's I wrote this word down, incontrovertible or unquestionable that it's true, or it's false. For example, the Mona Lisa is hanging on a wall in the Louvre. There's no question about that, right? Currently, as far as I can tell. Now, the Mona Lisa is a sculpture? No, that's false. That's not true. That's a subjective interpretation. So facts, you can see what facts are. Now, interpretations, it's a thing or a phenomenon that, while no less there, does not have the same quality of demonstrability or actuality that facts have. They are stories about the facts, judgments, evaluations, explanations, or analysis or conceptualizations. So the Mona Lisa is beautiful. Okay, it's okay to say that, but that's not a fact. Or, wow, that's an amazing smile she has. But that's still not a fact. That's an interpretation. And the test for interpretations, is it valid or is it not valid? How well does the interpretation of the facts to which it's applied? It's not right or wrong, true or false. It's either valid or it's not valid. Now, interpretations belong in language. It's dependent on language, on how we talk and how we see things. Usually it's a bunch of adjectives, right? So where we get into trouble is interpretation is they become about the facts. So an interpretation of the Mona Lisa is beautiful is not true. It's said about the Mona Lisa. So it's the blurring of facts and interpretation that has facts be the dominant thing we're dealing with. So the point is here is we experience facts and then we interpret them And then we collapse the fact and our interpretations into the truth. So the interpretations start to look like that's how it really is. Another fact. So an example is you go to work and you walk down the hall. This is not what we're doing now, but remember, you walk down the hall and your boss passes by you and he looks down, doesn't say anything to you. And you go, that's a little interesting. How come that happened? An hour later, you're walking down the hall, he walks by you, doesn't say anything, doesn't say hi like he normally does. Oh, then you start to think, is there something I did wrong here? What's going on? Maybe this guy really is a jerk. And then, this 2 or 3 times happens, and maybe in the next day, and then you go to a colleague and you say, hey, I'm worried about our boy. What's going on with our boss? And she tells you, wait a second, he has a toothache and he hasn't been able to get an appointment to see the dentist yet. It's happening on Friday. But have you ever done this? You made stuff up about someone just walking down the hall looking a certain way. So you can see we give a lot of meanings to a simple situation that causes you worry or stress. You make a meaning out of a lot of stuff. And to be effective in this situation, personally, you've got to deal with the facts and put aside what the interpretations are. So to sum this up, I'd like you to take a moment on that sheet, and on the left side, pick one really critical thing you're dealing with that's a fact. Like, I have $5,000 in my bank account and I'm laid off. That's a fact. Now, on the other side, what are you saying about that? Well, I'm going to run out of money. I'm a little scared. I got a lot of body sensations going on. I'm really freaking out. I don't know what to do. All of those are interpretations. If you act out of those interpretations, you're going to get yourself in trouble. You want to now take the facts. What's possible here with 5,000? What can I do about it? So see if you can separate, like that TV show. Most of you on here are too young for that. The TV show Dragnet, remember? Give me the facts, lady. Give me the facts, ma'am. Just the facts. So that's what I wanted to say. I got 2 minutes left, and I'm going to give it to somebody else, Doug. Hope that's useful for you guys.
Just the facts, ma'am.
Just the facts. Remember that?
Yeah. And so timely in the sense that, over the last several years, we've been kind of inundated about what facts are, right? And so lo and behold, here comes, a crisis where we have to make sure we're really grasping what the facts are versus what we're interpreting from the facts. So thank you. That's a great way and a simple way to look at things. We do have questions coming in, and so keep those coming in both online and at info@globalchamber.org, and we'll have time at the end to answer those. Thanks again, Barry, because we're now going to go to Clifton Short, who's a partner at Within People. She's in snowy Montana, but don't let that hurt your view of her warmth, her knowledge, and her capability to help us through some of the emotional things that we're all facing right now. So Kendall, thank you so much for taking the time today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for having me. So I think, the situation that we find ourselves in today, it really is unprecedented, as both Meredith and Barry have said. And for me and us at Within People, it's really interesting to look at how that's affecting, I guess, the landscape of work. And so we've gone from a time where many people wanted to work from home, but there was this inherent lack of trust about whether they could actually be productive if they were working from home, and a resistance to that, to this new reality where everybody has to be working from home, and the mad scramble to make that shift from in the office to in the home office, or in the bedroom, or in the kitchen, or in the living room. And what we're really starting to see is leaders, like, we're not set up for it. So just because you have a quiet space doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be effective or efficient, right? And just because you have all the tools that you need to do your job well doesn't necessarily mean that that translates to the productivity that you're used to. And so what we are starting to see is many teams and organizations really drilling into, okay, what do you need to be effective? What, like, have you got what you need? Like, what can I put in place to make you accountable to doing the work that you're supposed to be doing? And the gaping hole, I guess, for many organizations that's emerging is, but what about the people? Like, how are we actually taking care of like, this is a totally different situation we're finding ourselves in. And so how are we actually providing for the well-being, the mental well-being, the emotional well-being of our employees who are now trying to navigate, you know, taking the cat off the keyboard, or shooing the kids out of the bedroom quickly, like before anybody notices that they're there, or the lack of water cooler conversation, as Barry was saying. You know, normally you walk down the hall and you have an interaction with your boss and you make a story about that. Well, there's no opportunity to do that anymore. And so I think what we're really starting to notice is that there's a opportunity, I guess, for leaders to step into what is me supporting my employees on a more emotional level, on a more, as humans, I guess. How do we bring humanity into our workplace when we're not near each other? And how do we overcome all those things that we have been taught, especially if we're leaders, that are important? And what does leadership look like in a time of crisis? So many of us are living in a paradigm where leadership is having all the answers, leading from the front, you know, pushing the productivity and efficiency button, and you know, hitting targets sometimes hitting short-term targets at the expense of long-term targets. And that's just culturally what's expected, and the way that, I guess, business is done. But what we're really seeing, and this crisis is amplifying the need for it, is a rethink about, like, what 21st century leadership looks like. And Meredith's right, the stress of knowing people who are sick, caring for people who are sick, having your world in terms of, like, who you're connected to, your communities, whether that's at work, whether that's on a personal level, changing as people get sick, etc. That's an inherently, like, potentially losing your job. Are we going to still be around in 6 months? Is this going to last 2 weeks? Is this going to last a month? Is this going to last 4 months? Is this going to last 18 months? There's a whole world of uncertainty that people on an individual level and businesses on an organizational level are having to manage. And we've got, on one hand, businesses that are so busy that they just can't think about anything other than, like, doing the things that they need to do to stay afloat because they're so busy, like those graphs of things like Amazon and Target and Costco, etc. Then on the other hand, we have businesses who all of a sudden find themselves not busy and are facing, like, okay, should we be laying off people? Are we trying to furlough people? Are we just asking everyone to go to 50%? And there's really, you know, there's a couple of different themes, I guess, that are emerging. Like, how, I guess, culturally mature are we, and how does that help us navigate whether we're, like, so busy we can't cope, or we're not busy enough that we can't cope? And seeing businesses that have, you know, a really strong cultural foundation, tapping into that and using their mission to allow them to pivot quickly and open up, I guess, new opportunities, in contrast to organizations who just don't have the cultural maturity and don't have the conviction and the buy-in about what they're all about and the values that actually are going to underpin that, and find themselves kind of swimming in this, like, well, we don't really know how to respond to this. We don't know, we can't see the opportunities because we're too busy just dealing with the day-to-day. And even if we could see the opportunities, we're not agile enough. We're not able to pivot or rethink how we do things in a way that doesn't compromise the integrity of our mission, in a way that is going to make us emerge stronger from this, rather than, you know, question whether we're still going to be here. So, I mean, what is that? That's great, but, like, what does that really mean on an individual level? Because that's, you know, a powerful question. Like, great, how do I actually, what does that mean for me? And so I think that my 2 cents, if you like, on what does that mean for us? How are we showing up? Like, to really create some space for emotional check-in as well as productivity check-in. There's a real power to that, to allow and be patient and encourage and have empathy for and allow people the vulnerability of admitting that they're not really coping that well with the situation, and allowing for that to be a broad spectrum of like, well, some people are coping, some people aren't coping. Like, how do we manage that as leaders? And I think finding ways to build rituals and practices that keep us really connected as a community in this time where we can feel quite isolated. There's a real power to that. And I think much of what we need to do as leaders and as organizations and leaders of organizations as we emerge into a new future, which we really don't know what will look like, but we do know will constantly continue to change in ways we weren't expected, is to rethink our view, I guess, on what leadership is. We're all often taught like, well, you know, like I said, I need to be the all-powerful person leading the charge. Well, what if that wasn't true? What if I actually needed to be someone who could be vulnerable at work and gave permission for other people to be vulnerable? What if I had to actually, you know, unlearn the fact that, you know, love doesn't have a place at work? What if I actually started seeing people as humans? And what can I do, you know, if I'm in a position of leadership, or if I'm choosing to step into a position of leadership, especially as Meredith said, when the landscape of who's leading organizations is changing, like, how can we all step into rethinking what leading through crisis and leading through like an unknown future is? And how can we build rituals and practices that keep people connected to their humanity and allow them space to navigate this in whatever way that is, and still see that as being valuable? So I think, yeah, I think we are all searching for stability and a way to, I guess, manage the uncertainty that we're facing. And the more stability we as leaders can provide for our workforce, and the more we can tap into like, what does 21st century leadership look like? What are the skills I need in my bucket? How am I showing up to this crisis? And what am I role modeling, whether I realize it or not? Because that's going to, as Barry said, influence the stories that people are making up about what's a fact and what's a judgment and what's a interpretation, etc. Like, really creating some space to rethink that and be open to the possibility that that might be different to what we originally thought it was, or what we traditionally know about leading is. And yeah, really giving our workforce permission to navigate this in a way that allows them to share that openly, etc. There is many opportunities emerging from this, even just to rethink, like some of the organizations we're seeing who are smaller and are furloughing or laying off a bunch of people. There's a real opportunity for them to think, who are we? Who do we want to be at the end of this? Because now it's much easier to pivot with a quarter of our workforce. There's similarly opportunities for bigger companies who are really like almost overwhelmed with the work, to really think, okay, what are the rituals and the practices, and how can we build workplaces, and how can we build the way that we work in a way that's not going to compromise who we are and will allow us to continue the trajectory of growth, maybe in a different way, but it's not going to be this big peak and then back down to the trough as life returns to normal, even though there's no such thing. So yeah, I guess the take home is, how can we really rethink what our workforce is experiencing and our role as leaders in helping them navigate that, and what are the opportunities that are around all the time, and what do we need to do to open ourselves up to that, so that collectively, like for instance, I was on an industry call the other day where competitors were getting together to really like brainstorm, hey, how can we work together to emerge stronger as an industry? And I mean, that is unprecedented previously. So there are huge opportunities. We just need to be willing to see them and step into them. And I think really creating an environment where our whole team and whole community can be on that journey with us, rather than feeling like the burden of responsibility lies with us, is a beautiful place to start.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kendall. We have several questions, and so keep them coming in. We'd like to start, Kendall, with you regarding the first question, and relates to the home part of it. You know, part of the transition here and the emotional handling of what's going on happens now to be at home. And, you know, a lot of our family issues are also very emotional, and that's also under the same roof. And so it used to be that we could leave stuff at work and then come to home and have like a refreshed location, and ideally not have both places to be chaotic and have emotional pitfalls. So now we've got it all under one roof. And so are there some particular things that people can use right now, maybe some tools or thoughts that they should be thinking about as they now do kind of everything under one roof?
Yeah, I guess the place to start for me is giving yourself permission for it not to be as nice and neat and tidy as it was before. I think the more we can accept that this is going to be different and feel different and take a while to get used to, and the more compassion we can bring to that, that's a great place to start. And I think also throwing away, or I guess not throwing away, but like, well, throwing out like, hey, this is how it should look and feel is helpful, but then also recalibrating around our expectations. So for some people, if there's two people in your household trying to work, and you have one workspace or no workspace and a couple of children and a couple of animals, like that's a super chaotic situation. And so now more than ever, there is the need for good open communication and compromise. Like, okay, work can't look like what it used to. And I think too, like it doesn't have to look like anything specific at home, right? It can, like, if it means that you want to work from 6 to 12 and then your partner works from 12 to 6 and that's what works for your household, great, do that. If it actually doesn't look like that and you're trading off, like, well, one day I'm in the office and you're on the kitchen table, and then the next day we swap, and we're only going to be half as productive on those days because we've also got kids and animals and cooking and stuff, like, again, that's okay. And what many people, and then also boundaries can be massive. Like, okay, right now I'm working, it's only going to be for 2 hours rather than a half a day, but I need 2 hours of uninterrupted time, and then I can give that gift to somebody else in my time. Does it look like it used to look like? No. Does it mean that we can still be super productive if that's our goal? Yes. Like we had our Within Week last week, where we normally get together for a whole week as a partnership and spend the whole week together. Obviously, we can't do that. We moved to a virtual thing. We had 3 hours together each day, and we were like just as productive, if not more productive, rethinking like how we can support our clients, etc., in a short amount of time. So there's really, I guess, being open to it looking different, and then really like grabbing hold of the opportunity that presents itself from that, and being excited about that, even if it potentially was a different opportunity than you were planning for it to be.
Got it. I'll open up the floor now to other questions. One probably goes to Barry first, regarding how to process the news. In my case, early in my career in Philadelphia, the running joke we had in our family was you turn on Action News and it was, fire in Camden and murder in North Philly. And it was almost every single day there was something like that, because it was sensational. And to your point, it attracts people to the news for whatever reason. It's a human thing. So how do we handle the news these days? I don't even want to watch it, let alone. But we need
well,
news.
There's one answer. There's one answer, Doug, is stop watching so much of it. But it's addictive to keep watching the news, because most of it is not accurate, and particularly when they use words like a lot, or I don't know, like as the president says, great, beautiful, all of these adjectives just add more sensationalism to it. So I would just not listen as much. To your emotional states. You don't have any control over those emotional states. They just happen to us, and they get triggered by what people say. So I would just notice if you're emotionally upset or have certain mental states about it, is just see if you could put that aside and just keep listening for the facts. You know, go to Meredith, go to Kendall, find out what the facts are here and deal with that. And go watch cartoons or something.
Got it. Yeah. Kendall or Meredith, any other tips that you have regarding how to kind of, you know, are there rules around how many minutes a day we take news in, or certain news sources to avoid or to focus in on? Are there tips that you can provide people to help with that process?
Well, I'll let Meredith speak to where specifically to go for reputable news, but I think boundaries are really important. Like saying, okay, yes, I need my fix, if you like, or I need to stay, I need to know what I'm doing, but I'm going to check, just like we can all become more disciplined with our email. Like I'm going to check in the morning, and then I'm going to spend an hour or half an hour in the afternoon. And then, you know, that's all. Okay. I'm still going to know enough, and I'm not going to check after 8 o'clock or whatever. Like, again, there's no, I guess I shy away from rules, because then when we break the rules, we feel guilty, and that's all another emotional journey that we're going on. But really, like, building some discipline into, like, hey, what's going to serve me in the moment? Like, yes, I still need to be aware, and I don't want to just shut it off, but I am going to build some discipline into when and where and how often, etc. And I'm also going to be compassionate to myself if I need to offset that with some crappy Netflix TV. Do you know what I mean?
For sure. You know, the trusted sources really need to be those, you know, those organizations that are really on the front lines. The World Health Organization, the CDC. You know, at this point, I don't even tell people to listen to your local political leaders, because it's become such a divisive environment that the messaging is coming from both sides is coming, you know, is not consistent the way that it should be in a situation like this. So it really comes down to making sure that you're fact checking the information that you hear from those good, you know, those trusted institutions. There are also, you know, those mainstream media outlets like the AP and Reuters that have, I think both of them now have sort of a running fact check page that actually goes through and fact checks all of these claims about what's happening and that sort of thing. So that's often a good place to go as well. But you know, the Facebooks, you know, I have a friend who's a doctor who said kind of things, ignore those, because there are a lot of doctors out there with a lot of opinions, and who knows whether that friend is actually a doctor or not. Those are not the places that you want to be getting information. The local government, your local city government, is generally a good place to look for information for your very specific area. They're going to have the most up-to-date sort of emergency management page. They're going to be tweeting out anything that is changing in your local area. Same with your local news stations. So the very local, you know, WXC, whatever, you know, stations, they often have pretty good coverage, because they are getting down to that very local level. You know, here's what's happening here. But it is a flood of information, and you know, personally, if I didn't have to be looking at it all day every day, I definitely wouldn't be. And I know people who are, you know, who are obsessively kind of scrolling through their phone all the time right now, because it's just, you know, it's almost, I wouldn't say it's an adrenaline rush, but it's almost a form of entertainment. But it really takes its toll mentally if you, you know, if you can't separate yourself from it. Get outside, you know, get out of that, you know, kind of closed environment that, you know, that we all feel like we're living in right now.
Yeah, I know yesterday I turned off the dinger for the news thing on my phone, that because it was getting 3 an hour. You know, I'd hear this ding, and then, you know, invariably you look at it and it's like, you know, the world is ending, you know, part 1, and then part 2, et cetera, right? There, everyone is a piece of news, starting with Tom Hanks weeks ago, right? Or whenever he got coronavirus, to all of the things that have happened. And so I definitely recommend taking that off your phone. Your point on so much information, If you go to the Global Chamber website, there is a blog by Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland who talks about the program for the U.S. that was legislated on Friday. And it's long. I don't know how many words it is. I probably should calculate what that is, but it's unbelievable in terms of how much information is there. And so I recommend looking at that. I also recommend looking at a couple of the other blogs that are there to hopefully give you some background. But there's so much information. It's kind of mind-boggling. In terms of then, how to process that going forward, and thinking about the companies that have already pivoted and are overly busy, or maybe they've always been like situated to be successful, like Amazon and others. They're very busy, so they haven't had really much time to think other than just to implement. The rest of us that are in businesses that may not have revenue coming in, that is it a good time to sell people? What do I do? Do I approach people? How, what should I do next? Thinking about maybe on the small business side, what are some of the things that you would recommend at this point for them to do? And in particular, how to stay open and fertile to be able to make a pivot, not a pivot that is emotional based on, the interpretations of the day, to use Barry's terms, but more, hey, this is a real fact and this is something we can really do. And so we're going to pivot our business. How should small businesses be thinking about those things right now?
I can jump in if you want.
Sure.
So I think the place to start, Doug, is some organizations have a lot of clarity about why they exist. Others don't. So if you don't, you're at risk to pivoting to, you're at risk of making a pivot that actually takes you further away from like what it actually is, which problem you exist to solve and what you think is important. So I think if you don't have a lack of clarity, now with a bit of extra space, it's a beautiful time to invest some energy and time and thinking to actually get that clarity. Because without that clarity, then you can't really evaluate whether a pivot is going to be a good decision or not. You really need the clarity of like who you are and why you exist, plus the lens of like what's going on in the world and what does that mean for my industry. And you can't really make a good decision around that without those two things. So if you don't have that, that's where I would start. And then I think the more that companies can shift from like, okay, how do we survive in the day-to-day to like, hey, who do we want to be at the end of this? That's a beautiful lens to bring to things as well. Yes, we have to actually absolutely manage the day-to-day, but the more we can be making decisions that don't necessarily just serve us in the moment, but serve us in the long term, the stronger we're going to emerge at the end of this. So investing time in those two things would be my suggestion of where to start, and then layering in all those things that Meredith was talking about in terms of like, what are the emerging trends and risks for the industry that I'm in, and where am I thinking about moving towards, and is that going to be higher risk or lower risk, and how could I mitigate that risk?
Got it. Okay. Barry, anything to add there?
I think she said it brilliantly. I think the only thing is, again, to harp on that if you're listening to your emotions and your mental states of things, or even bodily states, it's going to get you in trouble because you don't have a lot of dominion over that. It just happens, doesn't it? We have lots of thoughts, we have lots of feelings. So if you can stick with what is so out here, get interested in what is so, and deal with that, you'll be on the right path. There are a lot of, I think Mark Cuban just said something about that some people are going to come out with visions of this that are going to be extremely successful, and opportunities show up out of it.
Absolutely. We only have about 3 minutes, and then I'd like you, if you could take 30 seconds to recap, but I'd like to ask this last question to Meredith. Do we know enough yet, Meredith, what the recovery from this looks like and what the time frame is?
We don't. In fact, we're preparing to do a webinar on Thursday on this topic with another of our partners. We don't know what that is really going to look like yet. We are, what we're trying to look at is we're trying to pick, kind of piece together, what companies so far have been able to kind of restart their supply chain. What are the pieces that are not falling into place? I think again, these big businesses will be able to pivot really quickly. I do think there's going to be a large snapback, and I think that's going to be very unique from what we saw with 2008, for example, because when everybody comes back out of their houses again, there is going to be demand again. And that is somewhat different from previous years where it's been a much slower uptick. But with the amount of money that we are pushing into the economy, the hope is that when this whole thing starts to abate, and I do think it will be a gradual recovery in terms of the social distancing, for example. It's not going to be, okay, you can come out of your house and let's go to a concert with 50,000 people. There's going to be new measures in place when we start, laying off of the social distancing, which is exactly what they've done in China. Return to your workplace, but with proper social distancing measures. So, you won't necessarily be crammed in next to your neighbor anymore the way you were before, right? We're going to give you bigger space. So I think it's too early to say exactly what that's going to look like. I'm optimistic that, as Barry was saying, that some really interesting and unique opportunities are going to come out of this. And I'm optimistic that there will be some change for the better. But we have in front of us, on top of this, we have an election year. And the whole election process has been kind of obliterated because of this, with the primaries being rescheduled, and really the candidates not being able to campaign. The only person who's been able to campaign is the president. And so what does that mean for the electoral process? What does that mean for elections? It would be very hard to change elections, to change the date because of the way our Constitution is written. But there are concerns about that. So all of that is to say that the uncertainty is not going to abate before the end of 2020. But I do think that there will be some very unique and interesting opportunities that come up as a result of that.
Barry, would you like to take 30 seconds and just recap anything or a final summary?
Well, I actually had a question for Meredith. Is that okay, or you have a minute?
Well, yeah, we're running out of time, so we'll have to save that for the blog post.
Perhaps. That's fine. No, I don't have anything else to say. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Doug.
Okay, appreciate it. Yes, send that on, and we'll include that in the blog post that summarizes all this. Thank you very much, Barry. Kendall, how about you?
I guess my 30-second wrap up is like, we have infinite capacity in the people in our teams, and our role as leaders is to unlock that and create an environment where we can tap into that. We don't need to have all the answers for that, even though it feels super uncertain and scary and risky. Like, there is lots of opportunity, and it's worth investing time and energy creating an environment where we can tap into that.
Sounds good. Good thoughts. Meredith, final word?
I think I've said enough. I want everybody to get off of the call feeling good. So I'm just going to leave it with Kendall.
What's your prediction on the baseball season?
What season?
I'd be surprised.
Really?
Hopefully. Yeah, well, on baseball? I mean, baseball's supposed to start like now.
Yep.
Right.
Well,
Talk to me about football and I might be a little bit more optimistic, but baseball?
social distancing is tough to do in a baseball stadium, isn't it?
It is. And it's tough to afford baseball games if you can only fill every other seat. So.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a bad way to end it, because I was really counting on that to happen. But do really appreciate all three of you. Really great insights today. We will post this later on for those of you maybe who only caught part of this, and check in with any of these three if you have trouble reaching them, either in the directory or other ways to find them. Let us know, and we're happy to connect you. Thanks again, everybody. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.